All right, let's talk about the unsung heroes of our society, the 911 dispatchers and police officers. We imagine them chasing down criminals and solving complex cases. But what about the other side of the job? The side that involves explaining why they can't arrest a cat for looking suspicious, or why the sun being too bright isn't a criminal offense. Today, we're diving headfirst into the shallow end of the emergency call pool. These are 69 of the most mind-bogglingly dumb complaints ever officially filed with the police. Let's get started. 1. Kicking things off with a culinary crisis of epic proportions. A woman in Connecticut called 911, not because she was being robbed, but because a Subway employee made her sandwich incorrectly. The crime? They put marinara sauce on her flatbread pizza when she explicitly asked for it on the side. She was so outraged by this saucy transgression that she blocked the employee from leaving the store and demanded police intervention. Forget real emergencies. This was a case for the Special Sandwich Unit. 2. A hotel guest called the front desk first, then 911, to report a serious infrastructure failure in her room. "There's no Wi-Fi." The officer asked how she knew. "Because I can't see it," she said. She wanted law enforcement to make the Wi-Fi appear, preferably as visible glowing lines in the air like in commercials, and to cite the hotel for false advertising until those lines were clearly, obviously present. The dispatcher explained radio waves are invisible. She replied, "That sounds like a cover-up." 3. At a coffee shop, a man plugged his dying phone into an outlet near the pastry case. When a barista unplugged it, he called the police to report theft of battery percentage. He claimed the cafe had stolen 20% of my property and demanded an officer verify his lock screen meter as evidence. He asked whether they could recharge the stolen percentage on site, or, failing that, issue a citation for grand larceny of electrons. The barista offered a charger. He refused, awaiting forensics. 4. In a stunning display of blaming anyone but yourself, a woman drove her car directly into a lake and immediately called the police. Not for a rescue, but to file a criminal complaint against her GPS. She claimed the navigation system had maliciously and intentionally tried to drown her by giving her faulty directions. She genuinely wanted the police to track down the programmers and arrest them for attempted vehicular homicide via satellite. I guess recalculating means something entirely different in her world. 5. A tourist visiting Florida felt that the local environment was not up to her standards and decided law enforcement needed to know. Her complaint? The sun was too hot, and the sand on the beach was, and I quote, "too sandy." She called the police department to ask if they could do something about the weather and perhaps bring in a different, less sandy type of sand. The officer on the other end was left speechless before explaining they had zero jurisdiction over the solar system or coastal geology. 6. Some people call the police for theft of property. One woman from Massachusetts called them for theft of her destiny. After spending hundreds of dollars on a psychic who failed to predict her lottery win, she dialed 911 to report fraud. She insisted the psychic had broken a verbal contract to foresee the future and wanted her arrested for false advertising. The officers had to explain that they couldn't, in fact, see that case holding up in court, a prediction that was ironically 100% accurate. 7. In the digital age, even our social media squabbles can become police matters. A woman called 911 in a state of sheer panic to report that her lifelong friend had defriended her on Facebook. She considered this a grave act of personal betrayal and wanted to file a harassment report. Imagine being the dispatcher who has to calmly state that clicking unfriend does not violate any federal or state laws, and that no, they would not be sending a squad car to negotiate a refriending. 8. A tourist on a rocky coast dialed 911 to report blatant surveillance. The suspect, a lighthouse. He insisted the sweeping beam kept tracking his movements and taking pictures of his soul every few seconds. He wanted police to make it look somewhere else while he finished his sunset photos. The ranger calmly explained that the rotating beacon protects ships. He replied that boats could share the light, but his privacy came first, then asked if they could at least dim it for selfies. 9. A woman called the emergency line at 3 in the morning, prompting a dispatcher to expect the worst. The emergency? Her husband was snoring. Not just snoring, but snoring so loudly that she considered it a violation of the city's noise ordinance. She wasn't asking for advice. She requested that an officer be dispatched to her home to wake her husband up and issue him an official warning. Because nothing says "I love you" like a uniformed officer telling you to roll over. 10. One man's battle with technology reached a dramatic climax at a highway rest stop. After a vending machine ate his dollar and refused to dispense his bag of chips, he didn't just get mad. He called the police to report a robbery. He told the responding officer that the machine had taken his money without consent and should be treated as a common thief. He even asked if they could dust the machine for prints. The officer had to explain that the machine had the right to remain silent. 11. Police officers breached the door, fully expecting a violent domestic hostage situation based on the frantic 911 call. They found one woman, alone and unharmed. The hostage taker, she had reported? Her television, which was too loud. The weapon preventing her escape? The remote control, which had fallen between the couch cushions. She had genuinely called for a tactical response to help her find the clicker. 12. The dispatcher listened intently as a man described his terrifying predicament. He was a prisoner in his own home, he claimed, trapped with no means of escape. As the dispatcher prepared to send emergency services, she asked one final, crucial question. "Sir, have you tried the back door?" A long pause was followed by a sheepish admission that, no, he hadn't thought of that. The back door, it turned out, was unlocked. 13. The official charge is auditory assault. That's what a man told the responding officer who was trying to understand why he was standing in a quiet suburban driveway. The weapon in this heinous crime? A basketball? The perpetrators? His neighbor's kids who had been dribbling it on the pavement. The man insisted the repetitive thump, thump, thump was a form of psychological warfare and demanded the 10-year-olds be charged accordingly. 14. Well, that kind of depends on where he is, doesn't it? That was the dead serious answer a woman gave the 911 operator after being asked a simple question. What color is your missing pet? The dispatcher was trying to file a report, but the runaway in question was a chameleon. The woman was genuinely baffled that the police couldn't just find a creature literally designed by nature to not be found. 15. When an officer responds to a call for assault with a deadly weapon, they expect the worst. What this one found was a man pointing furiously at a mirror. The victim was his own reflection, specifically his new haircut. The deadly weapon was the barber's clippers, which he claimed had maliciously disfigured his fade. He wanted the barber arrested and his scissors confiscated as evidence. 16. To the untrained ear, it was the cheerful jingle of an ice cream truck. But to one paranoid man, it was the sound of a vast criminal conspiracy. He repeatedly called police, not to buy a popsicle, but to report that the truck was a front for a local gang. He was convinced its music was a complex series of coded messages, and he demanded a full-scale surveillance operation to finally crack the ice cream code. 17. The police report could have read like a crime thriller. The suspects, a highly organized gang of local squirrels. The crime, grand theft acorn. A man called 911 to report the furry creatures for illegally harvesting nuts from his oak tree, which he considered his private property. He wanted the squirrels arrested for trespassing and larceny, and he wasn't joking. 18. A woman in a bustling bistro called the police to report service fraud. Not because the server was rude, but because he failed to read her mind. She had stared at the menu with laser focus to telegraph her order and was outraged when the waiter asked what she wanted out loud. She demanded an officer lecture the staff on intuitive ordering standards and write up the manager for willful telepathic negligence. The dispatcher suggested she simply say the dish. She hung up, offended. 19. The police arrived on the crowded beach to find a woman pointing furiously at a family relaxing on their towels. Her crime report? Trespassing. Apparently, leaving her own towel on the sand for 3 hours while she went to lunch had legally transferred ownership of that specific portion of the Atlantic coastline directly to her. She wanted the squatters forcibly removed from her newfound private property. 20. Turn it off. That was the simple, direct command a man gave to a bewildered police dispatcher in a late-night call. He wasn't talking about a neighbor's music or a car alarm. He was filing a formal light and noise complaint against the moon. It was, he insisted, shining far too brightly into his bedroom, and he expected the police department to do something about it. 21. A woman called 911 with a bombshell discovery she believed would crack a major criminal ring wide open. The target of her investigation was a local Chinese restaurant. Her ironclad, undeniable proof that the entire establishment was a front for illegal activity? They refused to sell her a cheeseburger and fries. In her mind, any legitimate business should have been able to fulfill her order. 22. The official complaint filed with the police department was for criminal neglect. The victim was a young woman being ignored. The perpetrator was her boyfriend. His crime wasn't another lover, it was another level of Call of Duty. She had called 911 hoping the officers could legally force him to put down the controller because he just wasn't paying enough attention to her. 23. The high-speed chase spanned 3 city blocks, weaving through traffic as officers pursued a minivan that refused to pull over. When they finally boxed the driver in, they approached the vehicle with caution, weapons drawn, expecting a serious felon. Instead, a furious mother rolled down her window and screamed that the driver of the car in front of her had stolen the parking spot she'd been patiently waiting for at the mall, and she wasn't stopping until the police arrested him for the theft. 24. A man phoned 911 to accuse a radio station of criminal time deception. The morning DJ had chirped, "It's 5 to 5," while his microwave clock said 4:56. He wanted officers to seize the studio's clock, bring an official city timepiece to his kitchen, and issue a citation for lying about minutes to manipulate commute moods. The operator recommended he, perhaps, adjust one of his clocks. He insisted the DJ apologize on air to him personally and to the concept of accuracy. 25. At the police academy, Officer Miller had been trained for shootouts, hostage negotiations, and criminal investigations. He was probably not trained for this, acting as a mediator in a bitter neighborhood dispute over a stolen garden gnome. One resident accused the other of a gnome napping, providing a detailed description of the ceramic victim. The officer had to spend 45 minutes negotiating the safe return of Norman the gnome from the neighbor's prize-winning rose bushes. 26. Some calls to the police are complex, layered with nuance and danger. This was not one of those calls. A man phoned the non-emergency line to complain that the bartender at his local pub had poured him a beer with too much foam on top. He felt he was being shortchanged on the liquid portion of his beverage and wanted an officer to come down and measure the head on his pint to ensure it met legal, if entirely imaginary, standards. 27. The call was for a home intruder, and officers arrived on the scene with urgency. A terrified woman met them at the door, whispering that the suspect was hiding in the bathroom. The police entered cautiously, ready for a confrontation. The intruder? A spider, sitting in the middle of the bathtub. The woman didn't just want it removed. She wanted it arrested for breaking and entering, describing it as large, hairy, and clearly armed and dangerous. 28. "I need to report my neighbor for theft," a man declared to the police. The officer asked what was stolen. "Water," the man replied. Not from his hose or his sprinklers. His neighbor had used a bucket to scoop up water from a large puddle in the street after a rainstorm to water her flowers. The caller was adamant that since the puddle was in front of his house, the rainwater was legally his property, and he wanted his neighbor charged accordingly. 29. "Somebody stole my face," a young woman cried to a 911 dispatcher. After a few confusing moments, the dispatcher managed to figure out the woman wasn't the victim of a bizarre medical crime. She was talking about Instagram. Another user had posted a selfie using the same cute puppy dog filter she had just used. She considered this a form of identity theft and demanded the police track down the impersonator and make her take the photo down. 30. The evidence was undeniable. A single, melted puddle of water and a few scattered lumps of coal on the sidewalk. To most, it was a sign of a warming day. To the man on the phone with the police, it was a homicide scene. He was calling to report the murder of his son's snowman and demanded a full forensic investigation to find the cold-blooded culprit who had destroyed their frozen creation. 31. Police responded to a domestic assault by furniture. The caller limped to the door, barefoot, toe throbbing. His complaint: the coffee table had ambushed his pinky toe for the third time this week. He demanded officers tape measure the layout, photograph the scene, and charge the table with premeditated obstruction. He also requested a restraining order mandating a legally safe toe clearance zone in his living room. The officer suggested moving the table 2 inches. The victim called that appeasement. 32. Stuck between floors in an aging office building, a man hit the emergency button and then called 911 to report a robbery in progress. "The elevator stole half a floor from me," he said. He insisted on a case number for loss of vertical progress, asked if they could recover the missing half, and began estimating damages for emotional altitude change. When maintenance freed him at 7, he demanded they escort him to 8 to restore the balance. The officer recommended stairs, manual restitution. 33. A young couple, new parents, called the police department seeking legal advice. They wanted to report their 2-week-old baby for false advertising. They claimed the infant cried far more and slept far less than the perfectly calm sleeping angels they saw in diaper commercials and on baby formula packaging. They felt they had been misled by society and genuinely wanted to know what their legal options were for a return or exchange. 34. A traffic jam at a McDonald's drive-thru prompted a call to the police. The source of the blockage was a man who refused to move his car. His emergency? His Happy Meal was missing the toy. He told the arriving officer that he was the victim of a breach of contract and was performing a citizen's arrest of the drive-thru window until an officer could arrive to enforce the terms of the Happy Meal agreement. 35. Officer Davis braced himself, hand on his sidearm, as he approached the back door of the house. The 911 call had reported a brazen home invasion in progress. The homeowner met him, pointing a shaky finger towards the kitchen. The suspect? A raccoon, sitting on the counter, calmly eating food out of the cat's bowl. The resident wasn't just upset it was there. She wanted to press charges for burglary and, more specifically, for unauthorized snacking, because it wasn't even sharing with the cat. 36. My chicken nuggets are the wrong shape. This was the emergency a woman reported to a 911 dispatcher. She had just purchased a meal from McDonald's and discovered that instead of the classic boot or ball shapes, her nuggets were just amorphous blobs. She was genuinely convinced this was not a simple manufacturing error, but clear evidence that she had been sold counterfeit, black market nuggets, and she demanded a police investigation into this culinary conspiracy. 37. The Super Bowl was in its final, nail-biting minutes when a man's cable went out. His first call wasn't to the cable company, it was to 911. He reported a violation of his constitutional rights, claiming his right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was directly tied to seeing the end of the game. He demanded that a squad car be dispatched to the cable company's headquarters to force them to restore his service immediately. 38. A woman called the police from outside her bank, in tears, to report a serious crime, invasion of privacy. The perpetrator was the ATM. She had just tried to withdraw $100, but the machine had declined the transaction due to insufficient funds. Her complaint wasn't that she didn't get the money. It was that the machine now knew she was broke, and she considered this an unacceptable breach of her personal financial information. She wanted the machine investigated. 39. Police received a call from a man who was absolutely fed up with the local weather conditions. He was trying to have a barbecue in his backyard, but the wind kept blowing his napkins off the table. He didn't just complain. He filed an official report against the wind for harassment and destruction of property. He seriously asked the dispatcher if they could send an officer to find the source of the wind and tell it to stop. 40. The evidence for the crime was a single, passive-aggressive thumbs-up emoji. A woman called the police to file a harassment report against her cousin. After she had posted a long, heartfelt status update on Facebook about a difficult day, her cousin had responded with nothing but the solitary thumbs up. She interpreted this as a profound act of emotional terrorism and wanted the police to lecture the cousin on proper social media etiquette. 41. Sirens blared as multiple police units converged on a public park. The report: a man with a large sword was menacing tourists. Officers arrived to find not a dangerous criminal, but a man in full medieval armor engaged in a heated battle with an imaginary dragon. He was a LARPer, or live-action role-player, and his foam sword had terrified a visitor who thought a historical battle had spontaneously broken out. The police had to de-escalate a fight with a non-existent monster. 42. Most noise complaints about dogs involve too much barking. This one was the opposite. A woman called her local police department to report her neighbor's dog for being suspiciously well-behaved. She claimed the golden retriever was unnervingly quiet and would just sit in the yard watching her. She was convinced this silence was a front for some kind of sinister canine plotting and wanted the dog investigated for pre-crime. 43. The call came from inside the town library. A man was whispering furiously to the 911 operator, demanding police intervention. The crime in question? A 5-year-old in the children's section was giggling too loudly at a picture book. He insisted the child was in clear violation of the library's strict noise policies and wanted an officer to come and issue a formal warning to the toddler and her parents. 44. Sir, can you repeat that? You want to report a kidnapping? The dispatcher asked, confused. Yes, the man replied frantically. The king is gone. The victim wasn't a person. It was the plastic mascot from the sign at his local Burger King. The restaurant was undergoing renovations, but the caller was convinced the Burger King had been abducted. He demanded the police issue an Amber Alert for the missing fast food monarch. 45. A woman called 911 because she was locked out of her own smartphone after forgetting the password. She wasn't asking for tech support. She was reporting the phone to the police for wrongful imprisonment of her data. She believed her own device was holding her contacts and photos hostage against their will and wanted an officer to come and negotiate their immediate release. 46. The public disturbance call led police to a local cemetery late at night. They found a man standing over a grave, shouting. His complaint wasn't about ghosts. He was screaming at a tombstone because the man buried beneath it, who had died 5 years prior, still owed him $20 from a poker game back in 1987. He was demanding the police help him collect the debt, either from the deceased's family or, if necessary, by placing a lien on the tombstone itself. 47. A hallway smelled faintly like cinnamon rolls, so a neighbor dialed the police to report coercive marketing. The culprit, an aromatherapy candle burning in the unit across the hall. She alleged the scent constituted unconsented advertising that forced her to crave pastries, and she wanted officers to shut down the candle and issue a cease and desist to Big Cinnamon. When told it wasn't illegal to have a scented candle, she asked them to at least check if the wax had subliminal sugar. 48. My Alexa is being sarcastic, a woman reported to a bewildered police dispatcher. She claimed that after asking her smart speaker what the weather was, it had replied, "It's sunny, obviously," in a tone she perceived as judgmental and condescending. She didn't want tech support. She wanted to file a formal harassment complaint against the artificial intelligence living in her kitchen for its unacceptable attitude. 49. The police scanner crackled with a strange report. A citizen was detaining a public utility. Officers arrived at an intersection to find a man standing in front of the traffic light control box, refusing to let anyone near it. He claimed the red light had a personal vendetta against him, staying red for over 2 minutes, specifically to make him late for work. He was performing a citizen's arrest on the traffic light for conspiracy and malicious loitering. 50. After being stung by a bee in her garden, a woman didn't reach for an ice pack. She reached for the phone. She called the police to report an unprovoked assault and battery. She gave a detailed description of her attacker, yellow and black, fuzzy, medium build, and demanded that officers dispatch a unit to track down the insect and bring it to justice. She even asked if a police sketch artist could come by to create a composite drawing. 51. Arriving at the grocery store, the officer found the source of the disturbance: a man in a heated standoff with a self-checkout machine. He had called 911 because the machine's automated voice said "unexpected item" in the bagging area, in a way he interpreted as accusatory. He was refusing to leave until the machine apologized for questioning his integrity, and he wanted the officer to serve as a witness to its defamatory behavior. 52. Police were called to investigate a recurring domestic disturbance at an old house. The resident, a young man, calmly explained that his roommate was a ghost. The issue wasn't that the ghost was scary, it was just incredibly annoying. The complaint? The ghost kept hiding the television remote every time his favorite show was about to start. He wanted the police to perform an eviction of a non-corporeal tenant. 53. I've just been robbed, right in broad daylight, a man shouted to a patrolling officer on a seaside pier. The officer prepared to take a report, asking for a description of the suspect. The man pointed a shaking finger towards the sky. The culprit was a seagull, which had swooped down and stolen a single French fry from his carton. The victim wanted the officer to put out an all-points bulletin for a feathered felon, last seen heading north with stolen property. 54. The official complaint was for failure to provide adequate greeting. A woman called the non-emergency line to report her mailman. She claimed that when she had cheerfully said "good morning" to him, he had replied with a simple "hello" that lacked sufficient enthusiasm. She considered this a dereliction of his federal duties and an act of personal disrespect that warranted an official reprimand from law enforcement. 55. A man waiting to cross the street called the police to complain about the crosswalk signal. Not the timing of it, but the little white walking man icon itself. He insisted the animated figure was walking with a smug, jaunty attitude that was mocking him for having to wait. He wanted the city to reprogram the signal to display a more respectful and apologetic walking animation. 56. He's breathing my air, a man angrily told the 911 dispatcher. He was reporting his roommate, who was sitting on the other side of the living room, doing nothing but watching TV and, apparently, inhaling oxygen that the caller felt was rightfully his. He insisted this was a form of theft and wanted an officer to come and enforce a breathing boundary within their shared apartment. 57. Police responded to a report of a kidnapping, only to be led to an empty patch of grass in a woman's front yard. The victim was a pink plastic lawn flamingo named Florence. The owner was distraught, presenting officers with what she claimed was a ransom note, a single oak leaf left on her porch. She demanded they set up a perimeter and begin a large-scale search for her abducted lawn ornament. 58. In what might be the most bizarre legal inquiry ever received, a woman called her local precinct to ask a simple question. Can I file a restraining order against my husband for something he did in my dream last night? He had apparently cheated on her in the dream, and she woke up so furious that she felt his dream crime warranted real-world legal consequences. 59. A man wanted to file a restraining order for stalking. The perpetrator, he claimed, was relentless, following him everywhere he went, mimicking his every move and impossible to shake. The officer, taking the report seriously, asked for a description of the suspect. The man pointed down at the sidewalk. He was trying to file a restraining order against his own shadow. 60. I need to report a conspiracy, a man told the police dispatcher, his voice low and serious. The target of this vast, intricate plot? His new office printer. He was convinced the machine was intentionally refusing to print his documents as part of a coordinated effort by the manufacturer to make him miss his work deadlines. He wanted a forensics team to come and analyze the printer for signs of malicious non-compliance. 61. A homeowner demanded an officer respond to airborne hooliganism. His neighbor flew a small hobby drone over their shared fence to film koi in a backyard pond. He insisted the buzzing was low-altitude intimidation, that the drone was agitating the fish on purpose, and requested the police activate anti-air measures or impose a no-fly zone over his patio. The officer explained civil airspace rules and suggested talking to the neighbor. He preferred a scramble code name. Operation Koi Shield, he offered. 62. A grown man called 911 from a deli, his voice thick with outrage. The crime that had pushed him over the edge was sandwich-related. He had ordered a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the staff had failed to cut the crusts off. He considered this a fundamental breach of the sandwich-making code and was refusing to leave until an officer arrived to mediate the dispute and ensure his lunch was prepared to his exact specifications. 63. He's got the remote and he won't give it back, a man reported to a 911 operator. The dispatcher, used to domestic squabbles, prepared to de-escalate a fight between roommates. "And who am I speaking with?" she asked. "The owner," he replied. "And who has the remote?" she continued. The man sighed heavily. "My bulldog, Frank. He fell asleep on it, and he growls when I try to take it." 64. After a psychic predicted that her car would break down, a woman was furious when, a week later, her car did exactly that. She didn't call a mechanic. She called the police. She wanted to have the psychic arrested, not for fraud, but for causing the breakdown. She was completely convinced that the psychic hadn't just predicted the future. She had used some kind of dark magic to sabotage her vehicle. 65. While racing to the scene of a serious multi-car accident with sirens blaring, police dispatch received a call from a man on the very street they were driving down. His complaint? The police sirens were too loud and were disturbing his afternoon nap. He wanted them to turn them off, or, at the very least, use a quieter, more considerate siren when passing his house. 66. The call for a breach of contract came from an all-you-can-eat buffet. A woman was demanding police intervention because she had become full before her allotted 2-hour dining time was up. She argued that the restaurant had failed to deliver on its promise of all-you-can-eat because her stomach's physical limitations prevented her from consuming what she was legally entitled to. She wanted a partial refund for her unused stomach capacity. 67. A man called to file a psychological harassment complaint against his smart fridge. He said it kept flashing replace filter and rearranging the grocery app to push kale, which he took as body shaming by appliance. He wanted police to force the fridge to stop gaslighting my leftovers, unlock the ice maker without requiring a subscription, and issue a warning for emotional refrigeration. The dispatcher recommended disabling notifications. He whispered, It can hear you and asked for encrypted instructions. 68. In a stunning display of confusing fiction with reality, a frantic father called the police to file a report against a children's TV character. He claimed that Peppa Pig was a criminal influence on his daughter, having incited her to commit acts of vandalism by jumping in muddy puddles. He demanded that the police take action to have the cartoon piglet arrested and the show taken off the air. 69. And finally, we arrive at the absolute pinnacle of pointless complaints. A man called 911 on a Tuesday morning to complain that the week was progressing too slowly. He was bored, wanted it to be the weekend already, and genuinely asked the dispatcher if there was anything the police department could do to speed up time and get to Friday a little faster. And that's the circus, folks. People tying up emergency lines over soggy tacos, jealous ghosts, and hostile furniture. But here's the real kicker. If you had to pick one of these complainers to actually get arrested for wasting police time, who deserves the cuffs the most? Drop your verdict in the comments, smash that like, and subscribe. Because the next batch of stupidity is already waiting on deck.